void outside the shatterproof polymers of the dropship was not black. It was a bruising, violent purple, stained by the radioactive interference of the gas giant looming off the starboard flank. Against that colossal backdrop, the asteroid fortress of the Vathrin hung like a broken tooth, spewing atmosphere and debris into the vacuum. Elias Ward checked the charge on his mag rifle for the third time in 10 seconds. The readout hummed a steady 100%, but the itch in his palms refused to settle. He adjusted the seal of his helmet, listening to the ragged breathing of his squad over the comms loop. They were young. Too young. Most of them had been drafted from the orbital slums of Terra only 6 months ago, and now they were about to breach a stronghold held by a species that treated warfare as a holy sacrament. "Stay sharp," Elias said, his voice cutting through the static with practiced calm. "We are hitting the breach at Zone 4, 0 gravity, 0 hesitation. If you see something moving that does not have a human silhouette, you put a hole in it." A nervous laugh crackled over the line. It came from Miller, the demolition specialist. "Just another Tuesday. Right, Sergeant?" Elias smirked behind his visor. "Sure, Miller. Just a Tuesday. If we survive this, I am buying the first round. If we die, I am haunting your bunk for eternity." The hull of the dropship shuddered as the retro thrusters fired. The red assault light flooded the cramped interior, turning their armored suits into silhouettes of blood and steel. With a grinding screech of metal on rock, the clamps locked onto the asteroid's outer shell. "Breach," Elias commanded. Miller blew the charges. The airlock door dissolved in a spray of molten slag, and the vacuum sucked the smoke outward in a violent exhale. Elias engaged his magnetic boots and surged forward, leading the way into the silence. The interior of the fortress was a nightmare of architecture. The Vathrin did not build with straight lines and industrial steel. They grew their structures. The corridors were ribbed like the inside of a massive throat, the walls sweating a faint, bioluminescent gel that cast long, shivering shadows. The gravity plating was offline, leaving drifting globules of frozen coolant and the floating bodies of Vathrin drones killed in the initial bombardment. "Check your corners," Elias whispered. They moved deeper, passing through a collapsing atrium where the ceiling had given way, revealing the swirling storms of the gas giant above. It was beautiful and terrifying, a reminder of how small they were. "Sergeant," a voice crackled. It was Cortex, their intel officer back on the command cruiser. "We are picking up a high-level biosignature moving toward your position. It matches the profile of a commander." Elias signaled for the squad to hold. "Identify." The line hissed with interference. "It is a Vathrin Royal Guard. The signature is distinct. This might be the one they call the Queen's Fang." The mood in the corridor shifted instantly. The Queen's Fang. The name was a ghost story among the Marines. Intel suggested she had personally dismantled 3 squads in the Vale sector. They said she moved faster than the eye could track and that she did not use a gun. She liked to get close. Elias tightened his grip on his rifle. "New orders. We are not hunting stragglers anymore. We are hunting a high-value target. Miller, keep the explosives ready. Jax, watch our 6. They pushed into a massive hangar bay. It was a cavernous space lined with alien fighter craft that looked like sleeping beetles, their hulls iridescent and sleek. The air here was thin but breathable, kept inside by a shimmering force field that covered the launch aperture. The ambush did not start with a shout. It started with a sound like tearing silk. Jax screamed, a short, wet sound that was cut off abruptly. Elias spun around. Jax was floating mid-air, his chest plate sheared open by a weapon that left edges glowing with cauterized heat. "Contact!" Elias roared. Bringing his rifle up, shadows detached themselves from the ceiling. Vathran warriors, armored in shifting plates of chitin that rippled like oil, dropped into the gravity well. They carried energy blades that hummed with a low, bone-shaking frequency. The squad opened fire. Kinetic rounds sparked harmlessly against the deflector shields of the aliens before punching through. Chaos erupted. Plasma fire scorched the air, turning the hangar into a strobe-lit slaughterhouse. Elias dropped a Vathran warrior with a precise double tap to the ocular sensors. But for everyone they killed, 2 more seemed to materialize from the dark. Then she appeared. She dropped from the upper gantry, landing in the center of the kill zone with a silence that was louder than the gunfire. She was tall, terrifyingly graceful. Her armor a sleek carapace of midnight blue and silver. Unlike the drones, she wore no helmet, only a high collar that framed a face of pale bioluminescent skin and eyes that burned with cold, alien fire. The Queen's Fang, Lyris Vaith. Miller panicked. He raised his grenade launcher, screaming something incoherent. Lyris moved. It was a blur, a distortion of light. She sidestepped the grenade round, which exploded harmlessly against a bulkhead, and closed the distance to Miller in a single heartbeat. With a fluid, twisting kick, she sent him crashing into a stack of supply crates. She did not stop. She flowed through the squad like water, her twin energy blades weaving a deadly tapestry. "Fall back," Elias shouted, firing a suppression burst. She deflected the rounds with a wave of her hand, her gauntlet projecting a sonic pulse that shattered the bullets in midair. She turned her gaze to him. The intensity of it hit him like a physical blow. There was no hatred in that look, only a terrifying, focused, predatory intent. She launched herself at him. Elias abandoned his rifle and triggered the servos in his exosuit. He caught her descending strike on his reinforced forearm, the impact jarring his teeth. Sparks showered around them as her energy blade ground against his armor. He shoved her back, using the superior hydraulic strength of his suit. She flipped backward, landing on her feet and immediately springing forward again. She was faster than him, faster than any human he had ever fought. She feinted low, forcing him to drop his guard, then spun and struck him across the helmet with the hilt of her blade. The world spun. Elias stumbled, his heads-up display glitching into static. He swung a heavy haymaker, desperate to connect. She ducked under it, her movement like a dance, and swept his legs. He hit the deck hard. Before he could scramble up, she was on him. She pinned him against a bulkhead, her hand gripping his throat, lifting him until his boots dangled inches off the floor. Her strength was unnatural, bypassing the weight of his armor. Elias gasped, his hands clawing at her wrist. He managed to jam his fingers into the seal of her neck guard, ripping away the protective cowl. For a second, they froze. He stared at her. Up close. She was not just a monster. She was hauntingly beautiful. Her skin had the texture of polished marble, glowing faintly with veins of violet light. Her eyes were not solid black like the drones, but intricate kaleidoscopes of iris and pupil, swirling with adrenaline and power. Her lips were pulled back in a snarl, revealing sharp, serrated canines. Elias wheezed, his humor surfacing even as his vision darkened. "Is that the best you have got?" Lyris tilted her head. The fire in her eyes flared brighter. She did not stab him. She did not snap his neck. Instead, she leaned in. Elias flinched, expecting a bite to the jugular, a killing tear. She sank her fangs into the juncture of his neck and shoulder. It was not just pain. It was an explosion. The moment her teeth pierced his skin, the world dissolved. Elias screamed, but the sound was lost in the roaring white noise that flooded his mind. It was not like being bitten by an animal. It felt like being plugged into a high-voltage data stream. Heat rushed through his veins, molten and heavy. His vision fractured into shards of light. He saw things that were not there. A crimson moon hanging over a jagged skyline. The smell of burning incense and ozone. 1,000 voices chanting in a language he did not know but somehow understood. A feeling of overwhelming, possessive hunger. Mine. Found. Life. The sensory overload was paralyzing. He could feel her heart beating against his chest, but it felt like his own heart. He could taste blood in his mouth, but he did not know if it was his or hers. The connection was absolute, a violation deeper than flesh. "Get off me," Elias roared, his voice breaking. Adrenaline spiked, overriding the shock. He reached for his belt, his fingers finding the cylinder of a flashbang grenade. He did not think. He pulled the pin and slammed it against her chest plate. Lyris's eyes widened. She released him, shoving him away just as the grenade detonated. The blast was blinding. A wall of concussive force threw them in opposite directions. At the same moment, the hull of the hangar bay groaned and buckled. A stray missile from the space battle outside had struck the generator relay. The force field shielding the hangar aperture flickered and died. Explosive decompression shrieked through the bay. Atmosphere vented into the void in a violent rush. Elias activated his mag boots instantly, anchoring himself to the deck plating. Debris, crates, and the bodies of the fallen were sucked out into the purple expanse of space. Lyris slammed into a structural pillar, her claws digging into the metal to hold on. She looked across the widening gap at him. There was blood on her mouth, his blood. Elias gasped for air, his hand flying to the wound on his neck. It burned like a brand. Suddenly, the red alert light strobing through the hangar turned a steady, pulsing amber. The roar of the battle outside ceased abruptly. A voice, synthesized and deafening, boomed over every frequency, overriding individual comms. "Ceasefire, ceasefire. By order of the Alliance Council and the Vathran High Command, all offensives are suspended immediately. Repeat, ceasefire." The silence that followed was heavier than the war. The venting atmosphere slowed as emergency shutters slammed down, sealing the hangar. Elias slumped against the bulkhead, his chest heaving. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a nausea that made the room spin. He looked up. Across the debris-strewn floor, Vathran warriors were emerging from the shadows, not to attack, but to retrieve their commander. 2 of them flanked Lyris, helping her stand. She shook them off, standing tall despite the visible tremor in her hands. She looked at him. The distance between them was 50 meters, but it felt like nothing. Elias felt a phantom throb in his neck, a pulse that matched the rhythm of the alien woman staring at him. Her eyes were no longer burning with combat fury. They were wide, confused and terrified. Something unspoken crackled in the air between them, a static charge that raised the hair on Elias's arms. Then the blast doors began to close, separating the human extraction team arriving on the left from the Vathran retreat on the right. The last thing Elias saw before the steel shut was Lyris wiping the blood from her lips. Her gaze locked onto his until the metal severed the line of sight. The medbay on the TAS Vanguard smelled of antiseptic and burnt circuitry. It was a sterile white room, a sharp contrast to the purple void and the dark organic corridors of the fortress. Elias woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright on the biobed. "Easy, Sergeant. You are safe." A medic pushed him back down gently. Elias blinked, the harsh light stinging his retinas. He felt like he had a hangover from hell, multiplied by a factor of 10. His stomach rolled, and a sharp, stinging headache pulsed behind his eyes. "What happened?" Elias croaked. His voice sounded wrecked. The medic checked a holographic display hovering over the bed. "We extracted you. The ceasefire held." You have been out for 6 hours. Elias raised a hand to his neck. A bandage covered the spot where she had bitten him. Under the synth skin patch, the wound felt hot, pulsing with a rhythm that was slightly out of sync with his own heartbeat. Mirror, Elias said. Give me a mirror. The medic hesitated, then handed him a small reflective slate. Elias peeled back the edge of the bandage. He stared. The bite mark was not a ragged tear. It was a perfect geometric pattern of puncture wounds, 4 distinct points. But it was not the shape that made his blood run cold. It was the color. The flesh around the wounds was glowing faintly with a strange, dark violet shimmer. It looked like bioluminescence trapped under his skin. "What is this?" Elias asked, his voice low. "We do not know," the doctor admitted, stepping into view. He looked tired. "We have run every scan in the database. No venom, no viral load, no bacterial infection. But your bioreadings are unstable." "Unstable how?" The doctor tapped the display. "Your cortisol levels are fluctuating wildly. Your brainwave patterns are showing delta spikes that do not match human REM cycles. And look at this." He pulled up a tactical log. On the screen, a blurry image of Lyris Vaith from the hangar bay security feed appeared. As soon as her face appeared on the screen, the monitor hooked to Elias's chest began to beep rapidly. His heart rate spiked from 60 to 120 in 2 seconds. Elias felt it, a physical tug in the center of his chest. It was like a hook had been embedded in his sternum, and someone was pulling on the line. He felt a sudden, inexplicable wave of anxiety that was not his own. "Turn it off," Elias snapped. The doctor swiped the image away. The heart rate monitor slowed instantly. "See," the doctor said. "It is a psychosomatic response. We have seen it before in trauma victims, but never this immediate." Elias buttoned his medical tunic, hiding the glowing mark. He forced a grin, though it felt brittle. "So, what you are saying is, I have space rabies." The medic chuckled, tension breaking. "Something like that. Sergeant, we will keep you under observation. For now, try to rest." Elias lay back, staring at the ceiling. He waited until the medical staff moved to the next patient before he let the smile drop. He closed his eyes, but the darkness brought no peace. Behind his eyelids, he saw her eyes. He felt the phantom weight of her body against his, and deep in the back of his mind, he heard a sound. It was faint, like a radio left on in another room. It was not words. It was a feeling, confusion, pain, anger, mine. He gripped the edges of the mattress, his knuckles turning white. Light years away, aboard the Vaithran flagship Ethelgard. The atmosphere was not sterile. It was heavy with the scent of damp earth and ozone. Lyris Vaith stood in her private sanctum, staring into a polished obsidian mirror. She had stripped off her armor, leaving only the ceremonial body glove. Her skin was pale, lit from within by her own bioluminescence. But the light was flickering, betraying her agitation. She touched her fangs. They ached with a dull, persistent throb. Behind her, High Warlord Kalen paced the room. He was an elder warrior, his chitin scarred from 100 campaigns. He was furious. "You engaged the enemy commander," Kalen growled. "You had him dead to rights. And instead of ending him, you engaged in ritual combat behavior?" "I intended to assert dominance," Lyris snapped, turning to face him. Her voice was a harmonic chord, 2 tones speaking at once. "He was resilient. I meant to break his spirit before the kill. And in doing so, you drew blood," Kalen said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You tasted his essence. You marked him." "It was a combat tactic," Lyris lied. She felt the heat rising in her neck. "It was instinct. Kalen corrected. And now the council is in an uproar. The ceasefire has complicated everything. We cannot simply execute him now. He is a symbol. And you have compromised yourself. I have compromised nothing, Lyris snarled. I am the Queen's Fang. My loyalty is absolute. Is it? Kalen stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. I can smell him on you, Lyris. The scent of the soft blood. It is woven into your biofield. He gestured to the air, where a holographic projection shimmered into existence. It displayed the Alliance Council's seal and the Vathran royal crest side by side. The order has just come down, Kalen said, his tone shifting to grim resignation. The emergency diplomatic summit is confirmed. It will take place on neutral station Halcyon. All key combatants from the engagement at the fortress are ordered to attend. Lyris felt a cold knot form in her stomach. I am to remain here? No, Kalen said. You are summoned, personally, by the Queen, and the humans are bringing their surviving unit leaders. Lyris looked away, her gaze drifting back to the obsidian mirror. She could feel him. It was maddening. She could feel a distant, distinct point of consciousness that was terrified and sarcastic and stubborn. It was like a splinter in her mind. Space rabies. The thought drifted across the void, alien and confusing. She frowned. What was a rabies? Kalen turned to leave, pausing at the threshold. His second in command, a younger warrior named Varric, was waiting by the door. Varric looked at Lyris, a smirk playing on his lipless mouth. You bit his neck in combat, Varric muttered, low enough that Kalen might not hear, but loud enough for Lyris. He did not know that made him your mate. Did he? Lyris spun on him, her bioluminescence flaring red with rage. I will tear your tongue out, Varric. Varric bowed mockingly and followed the warlord out, the door sealed with a hiss. Lyris was alone. She sank onto a meditation mat, trembling. She pressed her hand to her chest. The bond was there. It was undeniable. It was an ancient biological imperative that her people had evolved over thousands of years, a survival mechanism to bind the strongest warriors together. But he was human. He was the enemy. He was soft-skinned and short-lived and smelled of chemicals. And yet, when she closed her eyes, she did not see a monster. She saw a man who had ripped her helmet off and looked at her not with fear, but with a defiant, reckless challenge. Mine, her instincts whispered. No, she told herself firmly. Never. Back on the Vanguard, the ship's engines rumbled, signaling the jump to hyperspace. The fleet was moving. The destination was Halcyon Station. Elias stood in the small bathroom attached to the medbay. The lights were dimmed. He stared at his reflection in the mirror. He looked like hell. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had a bruise forming on his jaw where she had kicked him. He reached up and touched the bandage on his neck. The violet glow was faint but visible through the fabric. He thought about the way she had looked at him. He thought about the terrifying intimacy of that moment, the way his brain had flooded with memories that were not his own. He felt the pull again. It was stronger now, as if the distance between them was irrelevant. It was a compass needle, and it was pointing straight at her. Elias gripped the sink, his knuckles white. He looked into his own eyes, searching for the soldier he had been 6 hours ago. That man felt gone, replaced by something else. Something connected to a creature that could kill him with a thought. What the hell did you do to me? He whispered to the silence. Outside the viewport, the stars stretched into long streaks of light as the ship surged forward, carrying him toward Halcyon, toward peace talks, and toward the woman who had claimed his life with a single bite. Halcyon Station was not a place of peace. It was a monument to barely contained hostility. A massive rotating ring city suspended in the neutral zone between human and Vathran space. From the outside, it was a jewel of engineering, a glittering torus of steel and transparent aluminum that caught the starlight and spun it into neon gold. From the inside, it smelled of recirculated air, expensive perfume, and the distinct metallic tang of anxiety. Elias Ward stood by the viewport of the human transport shuttle, watching the station grow larger. He adjusted the collar of his dress uniform. It felt suffocating. He was used to the weight of combat armor, the reassuring hum of an exoskeleton. This wool and synthetic blend felt like a costume. "You look like you are going to a funeral." "Sergeant," said Captain Thorne, the diplomatic aide assigned to handle him. "I feel like I am the one in the casket," Elias muttered. He was not wrong. To the Alliance High Command, Elias was no longer just a soldier. He was a security asset and a propaganda symbol. The man who survived the Queen's Fang. They had plastered his face on news feeds across 3 sectors. He was the mascot for human resilience, a role he found about as comfortable as a sucking chest wound. The shuttle docked with a heavy thud. As the airlock cycled, Elias felt it. It started as a low hum at the base of his skull, a vibration that had nothing to do with the ship's engines. Then came the flash, irritation, bright lights, too many smells, hunger. Elias stumbled, gripping a handrail. The emotions were not his. They were alien, sharp, and predatory. He heard a word in his mind, echoing like a shout in a canyon. Kavas. He did not know what it meant, but he tasted the meaning, a mix of disdain and claustrophobia. "Sergeant?" Thorne asked, steadying him. "Space lag," Elias lied, straightening up. "Let's get this over with." They walked into the docking corridor, flanked by a phalanx of Marines in ceremonial armor. The station was crowded, humans in business suits mixed with alien species of all shapes, but the tension was palpable. Eyes followed Elias, whispers trailed him. He kept his hand near his sidearm, a reflex he could not shake. Across the station, in a docking bay reserved for the Vathran delegation, the atmosphere was funereal. Lyris Vath walked down the ramp of her warship, her head held high. She wore formal robes of deep indigo over a lighter, flexible mesh armor. Her helmet was gone, leaving her striking bioluminescent features exposed to the stare of the docking crews. Her honor guard flanked her, but their posture was stiff. The political handlers awaiting her looked less like diplomats and more like executioners. "Commander," a voice hissed. Lyris stopped. An elder stepped from the shadows of the airlock reception. He was old, his chitinous plates gray and cracked, his eyes clouded with age and judgment. "Elder Korth, you wear your shame openly," Korth said, his gaze flicking to her mouth. "I wear my rank," Lyris replied coldly. "I fought a battle. I survived." "You bound a human," Korth corrected, his voice a dry rattle. "Do not think we are ignorant of the old laws. Lyris, you tasted his life. In the time before the stars, that act sealed a pact. He is your life mate now, a bond that cannot be severed by distance or decree." Lyris scoffed, a sharp sound that made the handlers flinch. "That is superstition. I bid him to establish dominance in close quarters. It was a tactical decision." "Nothing more, is it?" Korth stepped closer. "The High Council sees a liability. The humans see a weapon. If you cannot control this thing you have created, the court will demand a purge. Do not let your blood betray you, Commander." Lyris brushed past him, her stride long and aggressive. "Superstition," she repeated to herself. But as she entered the main concourse of Halcyon, she stopped. The crowd was a blur of noise and color, but her attention snapped to a single point across the vast atrium. She saw him. Elias. He was hundreds of meters away, surrounded by human officials, looking uncomfortable and small without his armor. Yet, the moment she saw him, the dull ache in her fangs subsided, replaced by a warm, terrifying sense of rightness. Found. She felt a sudden spike of protective anger as a human diplomat grabbed Elias's arm to steer him toward a camera drone. Her fingers twitched toward the energy blade concealed in her sash. Do not touch him, she thought, the impulse savage and immediate. She forced herself to look away, her heart's pounding a rhythm that felt dangerously synchronized with someone else's. The diplomatic chamber was a masterpiece of neutrality. The table was round, the chairs were adjustable to 40 different anatomies, and the air was filtered to remove any pheromonal aggressors. It did not help. Elias sat on the human side, flanked by Admiral Vance and Ambassador Wu. Lyris sat directly opposite him, flanked by Warlord Kalen and Elder Korth. The air between them shimmered with heat. The proceedings began with the usual posturing. The humans demanded reparations for border colonies. The Vathran demanded the withdrawal of mining fleets from sacred space. Elias tuned it out, staring at Lyris. She looked regal, untouchable. It was hard to reconcile this icy statue with the creature that had pinned him to a bulkhead and tried to eat him. Lyris caught his stare. Her eyes narrowed. Something to say. "Sergeant?" she asked, her voice cutting through the ambassador's drone. The translator in Elias's ear turned her melodic tones into flat English, but he heard the mockery underneath. "Just admiring the dental work," Elias shot back. He tapped his own neck. "You missed a spot, by the way." The room went silent. Ambassador Wu looked horrified. Commander Lyris was engaging in traditional combat protocols. Warlord Kalen rumbled, though he looked furious at Lyris. "Is that what you call it?" Elias leaned forward. "Where I come from, we call that a weird vampire trick. Did you think I would turn into a bat?" Lyris smiled, and it was not a nice smile. It was sharp. "You lack the grace to be a bat, soft blood. You barely have the coordination to be a biped. I seemed coordinated enough to blow up your hangar bay," Elias said. "Luck," Lyris countered. "And a disregard for your own survival that borders on idiocy. I call it bravery. But I guess you would not know much about that, hiding behind your drones until it is time to sneak a bite." Lyris stood up, her hands slamming onto the table. The bioluminescence in her skin flared bright red. "You dare speak to me of bravery? I have commanded fleets while you were still learning to walk in gravity." Elias stood up too, ignoring the Admiral's hand on his shoulder. "Then why can I feel you shaking?" Lyris froze. The room held its breath. Elias did not know why he said it. He just knew it was true. Beneath the anger, beneath the armor, he could feel a tremor of fear radiating from her. It washed over him like cold water. Before Lyris could respond, the world turned white. A small, innocuous ventilation drone hovering near the ceiling detonated. The blast was not large, but it was precise. It blew out the structural supports of the heavy crystal dome above the table. Shards of razor-sharp polymer rained down like guillotines. Elias did not think. He did not check on the Admiral. He did not dive for cover. He vaulted the table. "Lyris," he shouted. He tackled her, slamming her to the floor just as a massive slab of crystal smashed into the chair she had been sitting in. Lyris reacted on instinct. She did not fight him. As they hit the ground, she threw one arm up, and a shimmering field of kinetic energy erupted from her bracer. It formed a bubble over them, deflecting the falling debris and the secondary shockwave of the explosion. For 10 seconds. Chaos reigned. Screams, alarms, the sound of security teams breaching the doors. Under the energy shield, Elias and Lyris were pressed together. He was on top of her, his hands bracing her shoulders. Her face was inches from his. He could see the intricate patterns in her irises, the way her pupils dilated in the dim light of the shield. He felt her heart beating. Thump, 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 thump. It was fast, erratic, and he felt his own heart slowing to match it. "Are you hit?" Elias gasped. Lyris stared up at him, her expression stunned. "You moved," she whispered. "You moved toward the danger, toward me." "Reflex," Elias wheezed, rolling off her as the debris settled. "Do not read into it." He offered her a hand. She looked at it, then at his face. For a second, the hostility was gone, replaced by a profound confusion. She took his hand. Her grip was iron-strong, her skin cool and smooth. "Security!" a voice roared. "Secure the delegates!" The moment broke. Human Marines pulled Elias back. Vathran guards surrounded Lyris. The two groups bristled, weapons raised, blaming each other instantly. "It was a human device," Kalen roared. "It was Vathran sabotage," Vance shouted back. Elias and Lyris stood in the center of the shouting match, dusting themselves off. They looked at each other across the divide. Elias touched his neck. It was burning. Deep in the maintenance bowels of the station, a figure watched the chaos on a bank of stolen monitors. The figure was draped in a technician's gray coveralls, face obscured by a digital mask that scrambled features into static. "Phase 1 complete," the figure whispered. The voice was synthesized, stripped of gender or species markers. "Fear is rising. Paranoia is set. Proceed to Phase 2. The figure tapped a command into the console. A stream of encrypted data flowed out, bouncing through a dozen relays before vanishing into the dark web of the station. 2 hours later, Elias sat in a secure briefing room. Admiral Vance paced in front of him. The Admiral looked rattled. His dress uniform was covered in dust. "We have a situation, Sergeant." Elias held an ice pack to his shoulder. "You think? Someone just tried to turn us into salad. That is not what I mean." Vance stopped, leaning over the table. "Intelligence suggests that was not a sanctioned attack by either government. It was an inside job. Extremists. We have reports that a faction of Vathran purists, the Old Fang Circle, is working with outside elements." "What does that have to do with me?" Elias asked. "We know about the bond." Elias froze. "We have analyzed the bio readings." Vance continued, his voice dropping. "You are connected to her. We do not understand the science, but we know the effect. You can sense her, maybe even influence her." Elias stood up. "Sir, if you are suggesting what I think you are suggesting, we need intel," Vance snapped. "We need to know who she is talking to, who her allies are. If the Vathran are planning a double cross, you are the only early warning system we have. We want you to get close to her. Use the connection." "Use it?" Elias laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. "It is not a radio." "Admiral, it is a curse. It is a weapon," Vance corrected. "And you are a soldier. You have your orders. At the same time, in the Vathran quarters." Lyris knelt before a holographic projection of the High Priestess. The image flickered in the candlelit room. "The attack was a warning," the priestess intoned. "The humans cannot be trusted, but neither can the warlords in our own court." "What do you ask of me?" Lyris said, her head bowed. "The human male. He is bound to you. The law of the bite gives you dominion over him." "I do not want dominion," Lyris said quietly. "It does not matter what you want." The priestess's voice grew hard. If the peace fails, you and your mate will be branded traitors for fraternizing with the enemy. The only way to survive is to prove your loyalty. Manipulate him, twist his mind through the bond, feed him false information, make him your puppet. Lyris looked up, her jaw set. I am a warrior, not a spy. You are what the Empire needs you to be. Do this, Lyris, or you both die. The solution to the security concerns was as absurd as it was terrifying. Due to the damage to the diplomatic wing and the heightened threat level, the station commander, a neutral artificial intelligence named Arbiter, had ordered the consolidation of high-value targets, which was why Elias stood in the doorway of a luxury suite in the station's habitat ring, holding a duffel bag. "This has to be a joke," he said, "inside the suite." Lyris was already pacing. She had changed into loose, low-flowing garments that looked like silk but moved like liquid armor. "The Arbiter insists that since we are the primary targets, we must be guarded in a single hardened location," Lyris said, not looking at him. "It streamlines the security detail." "We are roommates," Elias said flatly. "The human soldier and the alien commander who tried to eat him. Sitcoms have been written about less." "There are 2 sleeping chambers," Lyris said, gesturing to the far doors, "and a common area. We are to remain here until the Council repairs the damage and clears the sector." Elias dropped his bag on a couch that looked like it cost more than his entire military pension. "Fine. Just stay on your side of the room. I do not sleep with the lights on, and I snore." "I do not require sleep in the way you do," Lyris said stiffly. "And if you make noise, I will render you unconscious." Elias walked to the kitchenette. He needed coffee, or whiskey, or both. The first hour was a disaster of awkwardness. Elias tried to make a sandwich using the synthesizer, but the machine was calibrated for Vathran dietary supplements and produced a gray sludge that smelled of algae. Lyris spent the time sharpening her energy blade, the screech of the metal setting Elias's teeth on edge. "Can you stop that?" Elias asked, abandoning his sludge. "Maintenance of weaponry is a discipline," Lyris said. "It is annoying. Your breathing is annoying. It is so frequent." Elias rolled his eyes. He walked into the living area, intending to check the news feeds. He stopped dead. Lyris was not on the couch. She was hanging upside down from the ceiling rafters, her feet hooked into the architectural metalwork, her arms folded across her chest. Her eyes were closed. "Jesus!" Elias scrambled back, his hand going for the pistol he wasn't wearing. Lyris opened one eye. "What is the matter now? You are hanging from the ceiling like a possessed bat," Elias sputtered. "Is this a cultural thing, or are you just trying to give me a heart attack?" "It decompresses the spine," Lyris said, as if explaining gravity to a toddler. "And it aids in blood flow to the cerebral cortex. You should try it. Perhaps it would help with your limited cognitive processing." Elias stared at her. The absurdity of it hit him. Here was the Queen's Fang, the scourge of the Vale sector, hanging like a piece of drying fruit in a luxury hotel room. He started to laugh. He couldn't help it. Lyris frowned, lowering herself to the floor with a graceful flip. "Why do you make that noise?" "Because this is insane," Elias wheezed, rubbing his face. "Look at us. We are supposed to be enemies. I am supposed to be spying on you. You are probably supposed to be brainwashing me. And instead, we are arguing about ceiling etiquette." Lyris went still. "You are supposed to be spying on me?" Elias stopped laughing. He realized what he had said. He looked at her, seeing the sudden tension in her shoulders. "Yeah," he admitted, his voice dropping. "Admiral Vance thinks I can use the thing to get intel. Lyra stared at him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, she let out a short, sharp huff of air. It was a laugh. The priestess ordered me to make you my puppet. She confessed. She said the bond gives me dominion. Elias raised an eyebrow. Does it? Lyris looked at him, her gaze traveling to the bandage on his neck. No, she said softly. It gives access, not control. She walked over to the window, looking out at the star field. Elias joined her, keeping a respectful distance. The bond was humming between them now, a steady, warm resonance. It felt less like an invasion and more like a second heartbeat. You know, Elias said, looking at the reflection of the nebula in the glass. We used to tell stories about your kind, that you ate human children, that you didn't feel pain. We told stories too, Lyris said, that humans were a virus, that you consumed worlds and left nothing but ash, that you had no souls. Elias looked at his hands. I have seen us burn worlds. Lyris. I was on Oakhaven when the firebombing started. I watched the forest turn to glass. We have done things. Things that make the stories true. Lyris turned to him. And I was at the siege of Tyrannus. I ordered the kinetic strike that collapsed the city dome. Thousands died. Civilians. The air in the room grew heavy. The bravado, the sarcasm, the soldier masks, they all slipped away. They were just two tired veterans standing in a silent room, burdened by ghosts. I do not want to do it anymore, Elias whispered. I am tired of death, Lyris admitted. They stood close, too close. Elias could feel her sadness. It tasted like ash and salt. He knew she could feel his regret, heavy and gray. He turned to face her. She was looking up at him, her luminous eyes wide and vulnerable. The pull was irresistible. It was not just biology, it was gravity. Elias reached out, his hand hovering near her face. He wanted to touch the bioluminescent markings on her cheek. He wanted to close the gap. Lyris leaned in, her breath hitching. Her lips parted slightly. The bond flared, a rush of heat, of desire, of absolute terrifying connection. Elias pulled back. He stepped away, his chest heaving as if he had run a marathon. We can't, he said, his voice rough. Lyris blinked, the moment shattering. Why? Because I am not your mate, Elias said, forcing the words out. I am a job. I am a target. And so are you. If we do this, if we let this happen because of some biological trick, then they win. The people who want to use us. Lyris stiffened. She pulled her emotions back behind a wall of ice. You are right. It is a complication. She turned and walked toward her bedroom door. I will retire for the cycle. Do not disturb me. Elias watched her go. When the door hissed shut, he slumped onto the couch and putting his head in his hands. God help me, he whispered. He fell into a fitful sleep on the couch, plagued by dreams of burning cities and Lyris's face. He woke to the sound of screaming, not screaming in the room, screaming in the station. The lights in the suite were flickering. The air recycler was making a choking, grinding noise. Elias was up in a second, his pistol in hand. He kicked Lyris's door open. Get up! She was already awake, standing in the center of the room, her armor half donned. What is it? Something is wrong with the station, Elias said. He ran to the wall console and jacked in his datapad. He had picked up some slicing skills in the slums before the army. He bypassed the luxury suite's user interface and dug into the station's backbone. Code scrolled across the screen in green and amber. System failure in Sector 4, Elias read rapidly. Life support is offline. Carbon dioxide scrubbers are reversing. They are pumping toxins back into the residential block. Sector 4, Lyris said, her face paling. That is the Vathran civilian housing. My people are dying. She moved toward the door. We have to go. Wait, Elias said, grabbing her arm. Look at the code. He pointed to a string of characters buried in the diagnostic log. It looked like random noise to the untrained eye, but Elias recognized the syntax. It was a jagged, aggressive coding style used by black market hackers on Terra, specifically hackers employed by Ares Corp, the biggest human arms manufacturer in the sector. That is not a malfunction, Elias said grimly. That is a murder script, and it is written in human. Lyris looked at the screen, then at Elias. If this is true, if humans are suffocating Vathran families while we sleep, then the peace talks are over, Elias finished, and the war starts again tonight. He holstered his weapon. We have to stop it. We have to manually override the scrubbers before everyone in that sector is dead. Lyris looked at him. Suspicion warred with the bond in her eyes. Can I trust you, Elias, to act against your own kind? Elias looked at the door. I am not acting against my kind, Lyris. I am acting against murderers. He opened the door. Let's go save your people. Lyris hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. She drew her energy blades. Lead the way, mate. Elias paused at the word. He didn't have time to unpack it. He sprinted into the corridor, Lyris a blur of motion at his side, as the station's emergency klaxons began to wail. The official statement released by the Alliance Council and the Vathran High Command was a masterpiece of diplomatic fiction. It claimed that the near-fatal malfunction of the life support systems in Sector 4 was the result of unknown radical elements acting alone. It promised swift justice. It used words like unity and resilience. It was a lie. Behind the closed blast doors of the command decks, panic was the only currency that mattered. Long-range scanners picked up the heat signatures of human destroyers drifting just outside the station's exclusion zone. Vathran war cruisers were decloaking in the asteroid belt, their weapon ports open. The peace treaty was not just fraying, it was unraveling at the atomic level. Elias Ward stood in the center of the tactical room, feeling the headache that had become his constant companion since the bite. He looked at the holographic map of the station, then at the faces of Admiral Vance and Warlord Kalen. We are chasing ghosts, Elias said, his voice flat. You are looking for a fleet. You should be looking for a wiretap. Kalen rumbled deep in his chest, a sound like grinding stones. And you suggest we trust a human soldier and a disgraced commander to find this wiretap? I suggest you have no other choice, Lyris Vath said. She stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Elias. The movement was synchronized, unconscious. When Elias shifted his weight, she mirrored it. We are the only ones the public already suspects. If we fail, you can blame our incompetence. If we succeed, you get your peace. Admiral Vance rubbed his temples. He looked exhausted. And what are the rules of this joint task force? Rules, Elias said. Number 1. No using the bond to snoop in each other's heads. If I am thinking about a cheeseburger, I do not want her judging my cholesterol. Lyris narrowed her eyes. And if I am meditating on the 17 forms of lethal dismemberment, I do not require his critique on my technique. Number 2, Elias continued, no lethal force unless absolutely necessary. We are trying to stop a war, not start one in a back alley. And number 3, Lyris finished, her voice turning steel-hard, no political games. We answer to the truth, not to your agendas. The Admiral and the Warlord exchanged a look of mutual distaste. It was the only thing they agreed on. "You have 48 hours," Vance said. "After that, the fleets move in." The underbelly of Halcyon Station was a place where the air scrubbers never quite reached. It smelled of ozone, frying oil, and desperate biological functions. Neon signs in a dozen languages flickered over stalls, selling everything from illegal narcotics to repurposed military-grade shield generators. Elias walked with his hands in his pockets, trying to look like a drifter rather than a decorated soldier. Lyris walked beside him, wrapped in a heavy hooded cloak that did little to hide the predatory grace of her stride. "Stop marching," Elias muttered out of the side of his mouth. "You look like you are about to invade a planet." "I am walking with purpose," Lyris shot back. "You walk as if your gravity stabilizers are malfunctioning. It is called a swagger. Lyris, try it." They pushed through a crowded market stall where a vendor was selling skewers of grilled meat that looked suspiciously like tentacle. Elias felt a sudden spike of hunger that wasn't his. He glanced at Lyris. She was eyeing the skewers. "Focus," he said. "We are looking for a broker named She," Lyris said, tearing her eyes away from the food. "My sources say he moves data for the cartels. If anyone knows who hacked the life support, it is him." They found She in the back of a gambling den that smelled of sulfur. She was a Teldarian, a species with 3 arms and a face that looked like melted wax. He sat behind a desk piled high with data chips, smoking a pipe that emitted purple vapor, the Queen's Fang and her pet human. She wheezed, his voice sounding like a rusted hinge. "I heard you were mated. Is the honeymoon over or are you looking for toys? Watch your mouth." "She," Elias said, stepping forward. "We are looking for a name. Who bought the code that nearly gassed Sector 4? She chuckled, smoke drifting from his nostrils. "Information is expensive, and I only speak in riddles. It keeps the law confused." "Try me," Lyris said, her hand resting on the hilt of her blade beneath her cloak. She leaned forward. "I have a box that holds no keys yet unlocks the secrets of the dead. It travels on a ship with no sails, to a world where the trees bleed." "What is it?" Elias and Lyris looked at each other. The bond hummed between them, a sudden flash of shared cognition. Elias thought of the encrypted drives he had seen in the server room. Lyris thought of the destination headers. A data capsule, they said in unison. She blinked, all 3 of his eyes widening. That was unsettling. "Where is it going?" Elias demanded. She hesitated. "The trees bleed," he repeated. "It is a poetic destination. The crimson moon of Vylos." Lyris stiffened. "Vylos. That is a sacred world, a restricted zone." She shrugged. "Sacred to you, to the people paying me. It is just a drop point. The capsules are being routed there. The encryption signature matches Ari's corporation, but the receiver is using Royal Vathran codes." Elias slammed his hand on the desk. "Ares Corp and your people, working together?" "It seems," she said, grinning a terrible waxen grin, "that war is a business, and business is booming. The council refused." "Absolutely not," Admiral Vance shouted via the secure comms link. "Vylos is deep in Vathran space. If we send a human asset there, it is an act of war. And it is a holy site," Warlord Kalen added. "No outworlder may set foot there. We will investigate through official channels. Official channels means you will file a report that gets buried for 6 months," Elias said. "We have 40 hours left." "We are forbidding this mission," Vance said. "Stand down. Sergeant, that is an order." The comms went dead. Elias looked at Lyris. They were standing in the shuttle bay of their safe house. "So," he said. "That went well." Lyris was already stripping off her heavy cloak. revealing the combat armor beneath. They are afraid. They would rather let the galaxy burn than risk a scandal. So what do we do? Elias asked, though he already knew the answer. He could feel her resolve. It felt like cold iron in his chest. We go anyway, Lyris said. But we need a ship, and we need a pilot who does not ask questions. I might know a guy, Elias said. He owes me a life debt, or $20. I forget which. The pilot's name was Heavy, a scruffy human with a cybernetic eye and a grin that suggested he had not been sober since the previous war. He leaned against the landing strut of a stolen stealth shuttle, a sleek black needle of a ship that looked fast and illegal. You want to fly a decommissioned stealth runner into a Vathran holy zone, Heavy said, picking his teeth with a micro-driver. With her? He pointed at Lyris, who was currently checking the weapon mounts. She is not so bad once you get past the death threats, Elias said. I heard she bit you, Heavy laughed. Kinky, just fly the ship. Heavy, I am flying. But we need a co-pilot for the encrypted nav systems. This tech is half alien. I have that covered, Lyris said. She tapped her comms unit. A figure dropped from the ventilation shaft above them, landing silently. It was a young Vathran male, slimmer than the warriors Elias had fought, with crests that were dyed a rebellious neon orange. Cousin? Lyris nodded. You are insane. Lyris, the young Vathran said. His name was Rix, but I am bored. Let's commit treason. The flight to Vylos was a blur of slipspace jumps and white-knuckle evasion of border patrols. Heavy flew like a maniac, banking the shuttle through debris fields that should have shredded their hull. Rix handled the electronic countermeasures, singing a discordant Vathran pop song under his breath. Elias and Lyris sat in the troop compartment, strapped into crash seats. The vibration of the engines rattled their teeth. Tell me about Vylos, Elias said, trying to distract himself from the nausea. It is the sorrow of my people, Lyris said softly. Her eyes were closed. It is where the first Oathbreakers were exiled. The trees release a red sap that looks like blood. The atmosphere creates auroras that never fade. It is beautiful, and it is haunted. Sounds like a great vacation spot, Elias quipped. Do not mock it, Lyris warned, opening her eyes. The atmosphere is thin. The gravity is 0.8 of your standard. You will feel light, but weak. And the predators there. They hunt by sensing fear. Good thing I am terrified then, Elias said. Lyris looked at him. The bond pulsed. She reached out, her hand hovering over his wrist. You are not terrified, she said. You are angry. Get out of my head. Lyris, I am not in your head. You are broadcasting so loud I can taste it. It tastes like copper. Elias pulled his arm away. We are almost there. The shuttle broke atmosphere with a scream of heated metal. Through the viewport, Elias saw it. A world of black rock and endless forests of crimson towering trees. The sky was a swirling curtain of green and violet light, casting long, dancing shadows across the landscape. We are putting you down 3 clicks from the coordinates, Heavy shouted over the intercom. Too much interference to get closer. You are walking from here. The air on Vylos was cold and thin. Elias checked his rebreather mask. The gravity was disorienting. Every step propelled him a little too high, a little too far. He stumbled over a black root, flailing his arms. A hand caught him. Lyris, steady, soft blood, she murmured. She did not let go immediately. Her grip was firm on his arm. Elias felt a wave of protectiveness wash over him, not his, but hers. She was scanning the tree line, her body tense, ready to intercept any threat before it could touch him. I can walk, Elias muttered, pulling away. I know, Lyris said, But on this world, if you fall, you do not just hit the ground. The moss here is carnivorous. Elias looked down at the velvet-like red carpet he had almost face-planted into. Of course it is. They moved silently through the forest. The black spires of the fortress rose in the distance, a jagged silhouette against the auroras. It was a shrine, ancient and imposing, built from obsidian and bone. "This is where the old Fang Circle meets," Laris whispered. They infiltrated the perimeter using the stealth tech in Elias's suit and Laris's knowledge of Vathran architecture. They slipped through a drainage culvert, climbing up into the ventilation shafts that ran like arteries through the stone walls. Elias peered through a grate. Below them was a massive circular chamber lit by braziers of blue fire. In the center of the room, a dozen Vathran warriors stood in a circle. They were not wearing modern armor. They wore ceremonial robes of leather and iron. Elias recognized the markings. These were high-ranking nobles, and among them, standing in the shadows, was a human in a sharp corporate suit. The human handed a data pad to the leader of the Vathran Circle. "The weapons are in position," the human said. "The summit will be the pyre." The Vathran leader nodded. "Then let us seal the pact." Elias watched, confused. "Seal the pact?" The Vathran leader turned to the warrior beside him. He leaned in, baring his fangs. The other warrior tilted their head back, exposing the neck. The leader bit down. Elias flinched. He expected violence, a tear, a kill. But the bite was controlled. The bitten warrior did not scream. They shuddered, gripping the leader's arms. The leader held the bite for 10 seconds, then released. The wound glowed with that same violet light Elias saw in the mirror every morning. Then the bitten warrior turned to the next, and the cycle continued. "What are they doing?" Elias breathed. Laris was rigid beside him. Her mental projection was a storm of shame and reverence. "They are making a life bond," she whispered. "It is the most sacred vow we have. To bite the neck is to tie your soul to another. It shares life force, memory, pain. It says, 'I will die so you may live.' They are binding themselves to this conspiracy with a knot that cannot be untied." Elias froze. He touched the bandage on his neck. "It shares life force," he repeated. "Memory. Pain." He turned to look at Laris in the gloom of the shaft. "You said it was for dominance," he said. "You said it was a combat tactic." Laris would not look at him. She was staring down at the fire. Elias grabbed her shoulder and spun her around. The grate rattled, but the chanting below covered the sound. "You knew," Elias hissed. "You knew what it meant." Laris looked up. Her eyes were wet. Instinct took over. "In the heat of the fight, I felt your strength. My biology reacted. I wanted to claim it. I wanted to make sure you could never be anyone else's enemy. So you married me?" Elias's voice rose, cracking with disbelief. "Without a word, you bound my soul to yours because you wanted to win a fight? It is not marriage," Laris snapped, her whisper furious. "It is deeper. It is primal. And I did not plan it. You violated me," Elias said. The words hung heavy in the narrow space. "You changed my body, you are in my head, and you did not think I deserved to know?" "I was afraid," Laris confessed, the emotion bleeding through the bond so strongly it made Elias stagger. "I was afraid you would reject it. I was afraid of the emptiness if the bond snapped." She stepped closer, crowding him against the cold stone of the shaft. "I can feel you, Elias. I can feel your loneliness. It matches mine. Do not pretend you do not feel the pull." "I feel it," Elias said, his chest heaving. "God, I feel it every second. But I do not know if it is me or if it is just some alien hormone you pumped into my veins." "Does it matter?" Laris asked. Her voice dropped to a husky murmur. She was inches from him now. The scent of her, ozone and spice, filled his lungs. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown black, searching his face. The bond surged. It was a physical wave of heat. The anger in Elias's blood mixed with a sudden, overwhelming desire. The situation, the danger, the betrayal, it all funneled into a single point of friction. He looked at her mouth. He saw the sharp points of her fangs. He did not think. He grabbed the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair, and pulled her to him. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision. It was teeth and desperation. Lyris made a sound low in her throat, a growl of satisfaction, and pressed her body against his. Her armor scraped against his suit. Her hands clawed at his back, pulling him closer, as if she wanted to merge their skeletons. Elias felt the wall between their minds dissolve. He felt her desperate need for connection, her terror of the war, her fierce admiration for his stubbornness. And she felt him, his confusion, his desire, his fear of losing control. It was intoxicating, it was perfect, and it was wrong. Elias tore himself away. He slammed back against the vent wall, breathing hard, wiping his mouth. "No!" he gasped. Lyris stood frozen, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her hand reached out, then dropped. "Why?" "Because this isn't real," Elias said, his voice shaking. "Or maybe it is. But I can't know. Not like this. Not when I am wired to react to you." He looked her in the eye. "If we are mates, Lyris, if we are whatever this is, well, it has to be a choice. My choice. Not a biological accident. Not a combat reflex. I need to know I am choosing you, not just succumbing to the bite." Lyris stared at him. The firelight from below cast dancing shadows on her face. For a long moment, she looked like the alien monster the propaganda posters depicted. Then she softened. The bioluminescence in her skin faded from a combat red to a soft, melancholy blue. "No one has ever refused the bond," she said quietly. "It is considered madness." "Then I am crazy," Elias said, "but I am not a puppet." Lyris nodded slowly. "Choice," she repeated. She looked at her hands. I understand. I do not want a thrall. Elias, I want..." She hesitated. "I want you," she finished. "But only if you are there to be had." Elias let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Okay. He gestured to the grate. "We have a job to do." They turned back to the scene below. The ritual was ending. The human contact was plugging a drive into a massive server bank against the far wall. "That is the hub," Elias whispered, slipping back into soldier mode. "That connects the old Fang circle to the orbital defense grid. If we get that data, we can prove they are planning to bypass the summit security. Let's move," Lyris said. They dropped from the vent, landing silently behind a row of pillars. Elias moved to the terminal, his fingers flying across the interface. Lyris stood guard, her blades drawn, watching the shadows. "I am in," Elias whispered. "Downloading the packet. Ares Corp is shipping bioweapons disguised as medical supplies. They are going to trigger them remotely when the delegates are in session." It is a false flag, Lyris realized. They will make it look like a Vathran plague, and the Vathran response will be to nuke the human fleet, Elias added. "Total war." "Got it," Elias said, pulling the drive. "Let's go." A mechanical whirring sound clicked above them. They both looked up. A sentry drone, hidden in the darkness of the vaulted ceiling, rotated its red eye toward them. "Intruder detected," a mechanical voice screeched. "Run!" Elias shouted. The room erupted. The blue fires flared as automated turrets dropped from the walls. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, chewing up the stone floor where they had been standing a second ago. Lyris moved like water. She deflected a bolt with her blade, sending it ricocheting into a turret. Elias fired his mag rifle, blowing the sensor array off another drone. "Go left!" Elias shouted, sensing a flank attack before he saw it. Lyris didn't question him. She dove left, rolling under a stream of heavy repeater fire, and sliced the legs off a Guardian bot that had been about to impale her. "Behind you!" Lyris screamed, her mind projecting the image of a warrior charging Elias. Elias spun, dropping to one knee, and fired 3 rounds into the chest of the charging Vathran fanatic. They moved as one organism. There was no need for verbal commands. The bond, which had been a burden in the quiet moments, became a superpower in the chaos. Elias knew where Lyris was without looking. Lyris knew when Elias was reloading and covered him instantly. They fought their way to the heavy blast doors. Elias slapped a breaching charge on the lock. "Fire in the hole!" The explosion blew the doors off their hinges. They sprinted out into the cold night air of Vylos, the auroras swirling madly above them. Drones poured out of the fortress, buzzing like angry hornets. "Heavy!" Elias screamed into his comms. "We need a pickup, now! I see you!" Heavy's voice crackled. "Brace for dust-off!" The stealth shuttle roared over the tree line, its cannons blazing. It strafed the courtyard, suppressing the drones just long enough for Elias and Lyris to scramble up the ramp. As the shuttle punched it into the sky, leaving the black fortress behind, Elias slid down the bulkhead and collapsed to the deck. They did not go straight back to Halcyon. The shuttle had taken damage, a fuel line rupture that forced them to set down in a secluded cave network on the dark side of Vylos's moon to make repairs. Inside the damp, echoing cave, the adrenaline crashed. Elias sat on a crate, his shirt off. He had a deep gash across his ribs where a piece of shrapnel had caught him. Lyris was kneeling in front of him, applying a biogel patch. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were dark. She had taken a hit too, a plasma burn on her shoulder that had seared through her mesh armor. "You are shaking," Lyris said softly. "Shock," Elias grunted, "and the cold." Lyris finished sealing his wound. She hesitated, then rested her hand on his chest, right over his heart. Her palm was warm. "I felt your fear when the turret locked on me," she said. "You were not afraid for yourself." Elias looked at her. The cave was dim, lit only by the emergency lights of the shuttle. "I told you," he said hoarse. "I am tired of death, especially yours." Lyris traced the line of an old scar on his shoulder, from a war years ago. And this one, shrapnel, Battle of Orion. And this, she touched a burn mark on his arm. Exploding console, Siege of New Tokyo. She looked at her own arm, at the jagged white line running from her elbow to her wrist. "A human marine with a vibro knife," she said. "Vale sector. Maybe one of your friends." "Maybe," Elias said. "We are a map of violence. Elias, we can be something else," he said. The air in the cave changed. The bond began to hum again, low and sweet. The intimacy of the moment, the quiet, the survival, the touching of skin was more potent than the adrenaline in the fortress. Lyris leaned in. Her eyes searched his. The question was there, unspoken. The permission was there. Elias wanted to say yes. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to close the distance, to let the bond win, to find comfort in the only other person in the universe who understood what this felt like. He leaned forward. Lyris stopped him. She placed 2 fingers gently against his lips. "Not yet," she whispered. Elias blinked, pulling back slightly. "Why? Because the bond is singing," she said. "It is screaming at us to mate, to claim, to protect." She withdrew her hand, though her eyes lingered on his mouth. "If we do this tonight, Elias, we will never know if it was us, or the fear of dying. She stood up, putting distance between them. When we cross this line, she said, her voice trembling slightly, it will be because we are safe, because the war is over, and because you look at me and see Lyris, not the Queen's Fang. Elias looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the strength it took for her to walk away. He saw the respect she was offering him, the agency he had demanded. You are right, he said softly. He buttoned his shirt, covering the bandage on his neck. Thank you. Lyris nodded, turning her back to him to hide the flush in her cheeks. Check the transmitter, she said, her voice returning to its command cadence. We need to get that data to Vance. Elias moved to the shuttle's comms console. He plugged in the drive. Data uplink established, he said, sending the packet on a narrow beam frequency directly to the Admiral's personal encryption key. The progress bar crawled across the screen. Upload complete. Elias scanned the file headers one last time as the confirmation pinged. His blood ran cold. Lyris, he said. Look at this. She came to his side. What is it? The timeline, Elias said, pointing to the scrolling data. The false flag attack isn't just a bomb. It is a coordinated assassination. They are going to hit the summit during the opening speeches. He looked at the date. That is tomorrow. Lyris swore in her native tongue. The fleets are already positioning. If that bomb goes off, there won't be a treaty, Elias said. There won't be a Halcyon station. There will just be a debris field and a 1,000-year war. He keyed the pilot's intercom. Heavy, fix the damn fuel line. We are leaving now. Where are we going? The pilot shouted back from the cargo hold. To the summit, Elias said, locking eyes with Lyris. We are going to crash the party. Halcyon Station felt less like a diplomatic sanctuary and more like a bomb counting down to 0. The air recyclers hummed with a frantic energy, struggling to scrub the scent of ozone and fear from the corridors. The data Elias and Lyris had transmitted from Vilos, fragmented, encrypted, and terrifying, had not brought the clarity they hoped for. Instead, it had shattered the fragile trust between humanity and the Vathran into 1,000,000 jagged shards. Every screen on the station flashed with accusations. Human news feeds claimed the data was a Vathran fabrication designed to frame innocent corporations. Vathran networks decried it as human heresy, a digital poison meant to destabilize the throne, and in the middle of the storm, standing in the eye of the hurricane, were Elias Ward and Commander Lyris Vaith. They stood in the center of Admiral Vance's office. The Admiral looked 10 years older than he had 2 days ago. His uniform was rumpled, and a half-empty glass of amber liquid sat on his desk. Beside him stood a Vathran magistrate, a tall, silent figure in judicial robes. You had no authorization, Vance said, his voice low and dangerous. You stole a shuttle. You invaded a sacred exclusion zone. You engaged in a firefight with automated defenses that technically do not exist. We found the truth, Elias said, his arms crossed. He leaned against the wall, trying to hide the tremor in his hands. The withdrawal from the combat stims was hitting him hard, or maybe it was just the sheer exhaustion of being linked to Lyris. You found a mess, Sergeant, Vance snapped. Half the council wants you court-martialed. The other half wants you spacing. And my people call for the commander's blood, the magistrate added, his voice like dry leaves skittering on pavement. To bond with a human is distasteful. To use that bond to expose the shame of the old Fang Circle is treason. Then why are we not in a brig? Lyris asked. She stood at attention, but her eyes were burning with a defiance that filled the room. Elias could feel it through the bond, a hot, steady pressure against his mind. Because, Vance sighed, looking at the magistrate, There are still a few of us who prefer messy truths to polite lies. We cannot officially sanction what you did. In fact, officially, you are confined to quarters pending a tribunal. Vance slid a data pad across the desk. Unofficially, we know the data you sent is incomplete. The transaction logs were corrupted during the transmission. We have the what and the when, but we do not have the who. We need names. We need the master encryption key. The magistrate clarified. It is stored in the central archives here on Halcyon, in the deep vault. You want us to break into the most secure bank in the sector, Elias said, raising an eyebrow. While under house arrest, we want you to remain in your quarters and reflect on your poor choices, Vance said, holding Elias's gaze with significant intensity. We certainly do not expect you to utilize the blind spot in the security grid between 0400 and 0500 hours. And we definitely do not expect you to retrieve the physical drive that proves Admiral Holloway and High Lord Vex are the architects of this war. Elias felt a jolt of shock from Lyris. Holloway. The name echoed in his head before she even spoke it. Admiral Holloway, Elias asked. Your second in command? He has been coordinating fleet movements that do not match my orders, Vance said grimly. If he is working with Vex, then we are all dead men walking. Get the drive, bring it to me, and try not to get killed. The corridors of the executive wing were quiet, but it was a deceptive silence. Elias walked beside a security escort that was ostensibly guarding them but practically marching them to a meeting they could not refuse. Mr. Ward? A voice smoothed over the intercom. A moment of your time. The escort stopped. A door slid open, revealing a room that smelled of expensive leather and synthetic vanilla. A man in a suit that cost more than Elias's entire childhood neighborhood sat behind a floating desk. He was smiling. It was the kind of smile a shark gives before it decides which limb to tear off first. Mr. Silas, Ares Corporation, the man said, gesturing to a chair. Please, I will stand, Elias said. Mr. Silas shrugged. As you wish. I will be brief. You are in a difficult position. Sergeant, the data you found, it is open to interpretation. Mistakes happen. Sensors glitch. We are willing to believe that your report was a result of stress. Stress, Elias repeated. And the biological tampering you have endured, Silas said, gesturing vaguely to Elias's neck. We have top-tier medical facilities, Elias. We believe we can reverse the effects of the Vathran bite. We can cut that alien noise out of your head. You could be yourself again. Rich, famous, and human. All you have to do is issue a statement saying you were confused, that the bond made you hallucinate. Elias felt Lyris's presence in the back of his mind. She was in the next room, being interrogated by her own people. But he could feel her sudden spike of cold dread. She heard the offer. She felt his temptation, to be free, to be silent. Elias looked at Silas. He looked at the perfect suit, the manicured hands. You know, Elias said, his voice conversational. For a long time, I thought this mark was a curse. I thought it made me a monster. He touched the bandage on his neck. But then I realized something. It does not make me a monster. It makes me a lie detector. And right now? Elias leaned in, his grin sharp and dangerous. You smell like fear. Mr. Silas, you are terrified. Because you know that I can feel her integrity, and she can feel mine, and neither of us is for sale. Keep your money, and keep your cure. I like the noise. It reminds me I am not like you. He turned and walked out. He felt a wave of warmth wash over him from the other room. Lyris's relief, her fierce pride. It was better than any paycheck. Lyra stood in the center of a circular chamber, surrounded by holographic projections of the royal court. In the center, towering over the others, was the projection of the queen. The queen was ancient, her chitin white with age, her eyes clouded with the wisdom of centuries. "You stand accused of bonding with a lower life form." The queen's voice thrummed, vibrating the floor plates. "You stand accused of bringing shame to the bloodline." "I stand accused of survival," Lyris answered, her head high. "You defend him," a courtier sneered from the left. "The soft blood. You speak of him as if he were a warrior." "He is a warrior," Lyris snapped, turning on the projection. "He fought me to a standstill. He invaded the sacred moon to save our people from poison. He has more honor in his soft skin than you have in your entire armored carapace." "Silence," the queen commanded. Lyris looked at her sovereign. "My queen, you know the old Fang Circle plots against you. You know they wish to return to the days of endless conquest. They use this war to weaken your rule. Elias Ward is not the enemy. He is the only reason the galaxy is not already burning." The queen stared at her for a long time. Lyris felt a flicker of something strange from the monarch. Not anger, but resignation. "You speak with the fire of a mate," the queen said softly. "But fire can consume as easily as it cleanses. Go, Lyris Vaith. But know this. If you are wrong, if this human betrays you, it will be my hand that ends you." Back in the safe house, the silence was heavy. Elias was cleaning his weapons, stripping the mag rifle down to its components. Lyris was pacing, her claws clicking rhythmically on the metal floor. "You told him to keep his money," she said. "It was not a question." "I did. You could have been cured, Elias. You could have been free of me." Elias slid the bolt carrier back into place with a satisfying click. He looked up at her. "Who says I want to be cured?" Lyris stopped pacing. She looked at him, her bioluminescence dim and swirling with blue currents of uncertainty. "The queen is trapped," she whispered, changing the subject abruptly. "I felt it. She wants to believe us. But the court is filled with vipers. The old Fang Circle has her surrounded. She is waiting for proof. If we do not get that drive, she will have no choice but to declare war just to keep her throne." "Then we get the drive," Elias said. "Tonight." The bond between them shifted. In the beginning, it had been a chaotic storm of intruding emotions. Now, it was settling into a hum, a background frequency that connected them. Elias could sense not just her feelings, but the shape of her thoughts. He knew she was calculating the odds. He knew she was worried about his left flank, where his old injury was stiffening. And she knew he was afraid, not of dying, but of failing her. "We need to calibrate the disruptors," Lyris said, walking over to the table where their gear was spread out. "The vault has a biometric seal. It reads DNA. I guess it is a good thing I have a little Vaithrin in me now," Elias joked, tapping his neck. Lyris did not smile. She picked up a small, spherical device. "This is a sensory dampener. We can use it to trick the proximity sensors, but we have to be perfectly synchronized. If I move, you move. If I stop, you stop. Like a three-legged race," Elias said. "But with lasers." "Trust exercise," Lyris corrected. She held out the sphere. Elias reached for it. Their fingers brushed. The spark was immediate, not painful, but electric. A jolt of shared awareness. For a second, Elias saw himself through her eyes, tired, scruffy, determined, and strangely beautiful in a rugged, fragile way. And Lyris saw herself through his, luminous, terrifying, and breathtakingly strong. They pulled back, the air crackling. "Okay." Elias cleared his throat. "Synchronization. Got it." The ventilation shaft was cramped, dark, and smelled of grease. It was also the only way into the central archives that didn't involve walking through a squad of automated killbots. Elias crawled in front, checking the scanner. Lyris was behind him, covering their six. Left, Lyris whispered, not aloud, but in his mind. Elias turned left without questioning it. He knew she had heard the hum of a cooling fan that indicated a junction. They dropped down into a maintenance corridor. Red laser grids crisscrossed the hallway, moving in complex, shifting patterns. "This is it," Elias whispered. "The blind man's walk." He closed his eyes. "I can't see the patterns." "Lyris," he said, "my human eyes aren't fast enough." "I see them," Lyris replied. Her voice was calm in his head. "Step forward. Now." Elias stepped. He felt the heat of a laser beam pass inches from his nose. Pause. Duck. Slide right. He moved like a puppet on a string, surrendering his autonomy completely to her. He trusted her with his life, with every breath. He felt her focus, sharp as a diamond, guiding him through the deadly maze. Jump! Elias leaped. He landed on the other side of the grid, sweating and shaking. "Your turn," he breathed. Lyris stepped into the grid. "I cannot see the thermal sensors," she projected. "They are calibrated to ignore my body heat, but the pressure plates are active. I see them." Elias sent back. He watched the floor through his thermal goggles. "Third tile. Left. Don't touch the edges." She moved with liquid grace, following his mental map. "Stop," he projected suddenly. "Wait for the cycle. Now." She landed beside him. They looked at each other, adrenaline flooding their systems. The bond was wide open, a roaring river of shared sensation. They were not two people anymore. They were one entity with two bodies. They moved deeper, cracking the electronic locks with a combination of Elias's slicing code and Lyris's intuitive understanding of the alien hybrid tech. They reached the final maintenance shaft, a narrow vertical climb that led directly to the vault's cooling system. They paused on a small landing to catch their breath. The alarms from a patrol they had bypassed were wailing in the distance, muffled by the thick walls. Elias leaned his head against the cool metal. "We are close." Lyris was breathing hard, pressed against him in the narrow space. Her eyes were glowing brightly in the dark. "Elias," she whispered. He looked at her. The proximity was overwhelming. The fear of what was coming, the high probability of death, stripped away the last layers of their defenses. "I can feel you," Elias said, his voice choking. "I can feel how scared you are. Not of dying, of losing this." Lyris let out a ragged sob. "I spent my life alone, Elias, a weapon in a sheath. I did not know what it was to be held, to be known." She reached out, grabbing the lapels of his tactical vest. "If we die in there," she said fiercely, "I want you to know, I choose you. Not the bite, not the politics. You." Elias didn't speak. He crushed his mouth to hers. This time, there was no hesitation, no pulling back. It was a desperate, hungry collision of souls. They clung to each other in the dark shaft, the metal biting into their backs, the alarms screaming a distant soundtrack to their desperation. It was a claiming, a fierce assertion of life in the face of annihilation. The bond flared white-hot, burning away the walls between them until Elias didn't know where his fear ended and her love began. They stayed there for a long moment, foreheads resting together, breathing the same air. "We are going to make it," Elias whispered, his hands framing her face. "We are going to make it because I am not done arguing with you yet." Lyris laughed, a wet, shaky sound. "And I have not yet taught you proper sword forms. It would be a waste to die now." She pulled away, her eyes clear and focused. The bond settled into a steely resolve. Let's finish this. The vault door was a massive slab of duranium. Elias bypassed the keypad while Lyris used her command codes to confuse the biometric scanner. The door hissed open. The room was filled with rows of crystalline data servers. In the center sat the master terminal. Elias jacked in. The drive Vance wanted was physically slotted into the core. He reached for it. Got it, he said. He pulled the drive. As soon as it disconnected, the lights in the vault turned blood red. Trap. Lyris screamed in his mind. The blast doors they had just entered slammed shut. A holographic projection flickered to life in the center of the room. Admiral Halloway stood there, smiling coldly. Beside him was High Lord Vex of the Old Fang Circle. Predictable, Halloway said. Vance always did have a soft spot for lost causes. You are a traitor, Elias spat. I am a patriot, Halloway corrected. Peace is a pause, Sergeant. War is the natural state of humanity. And thanks to you, we have the perfect excuse to restart it. Vex stepped forward. You have the evidence. Yes. But you will never leave this room to present it. The station security forces are already cutting through the door, and we have vented the atmosphere in the corridor. Goodbye, Commander. Vex sneered. Die with your pet. The hologram vanished. Elias looked at the door. Sparks were flying as plasma cutters began to chew through the metal. We can't go back the way we came, Elias said. Lyris scanned the room. Her eyes locked on a ventilation grate high on the wall. The coolant exhaust. It leads to the exterior hull, she said. That is a vacuum. Lyris. Better vacuum than a firing squad, she said. Do you trust me? Always. They stacked crates and scrambled up to the vent. Lyris kicked the grate out. The rush of air was immediate, sucking at them. They crawled through the freezing tunnel, the metal contracting around them. They emerged into a zero-gravity maintenance shaft that ran along the spine of the station. Below them, through the transparent aluminum floor, they could see the stars spinning. Security teams were already flooding the shaft from the far end. Laser fire erupted, scorching the walls around them. Move! Lyris shouted. They pushed off the walls, floating and twisting in the zero-G. Elias fired back, his mag rifle thudding against his shoulder. He took out a drone, but there were too many soldiers. They scrambled into a service junction, sealing the hatch behind them. They were cornered. The only way out was a large observation dome that overlooked the docking bays. They burst into the dome. It was a dead end. Outside the glass, the stars were cold and indifferent. Behind the door, heavy boots were pounding. Elias looked at the drive in his hand. If they catch us, they destroy this, and the war starts. We have to transmit it, Lyris said. I can't, Elias said, checking his comms. Halloway is jamming all frequencies. We can't send a signal out. Then we destroy it? Lyris asked, her voice hollow. No, Elias said. If we destroy it, the truth dies with us. We have to preserve it. The door buckled. A plasma torch cut a glowing line through the lock. Elias looked at Lyris. He saw the resignation in her eyes. She was ready to die fighting. She drew her blades. Wait, Elias said. He looked out the window. A ship was rising from the lower docking bays. It wasn't a military cruiser. It was a Black Needle, scarred and ugly. The stealth shuttle. Heavy! Elias screamed into his short-range comms. I see you, kid. Heavy's voice crackled, full of static but beautiful. You looked like you needed a ride. The shuttle rose until it was hovering right in front of the observation dome. Back up, Elias yelled at Lyris. He pulled a breaching charge from his belt and slapped it on the reinforced glass. This is going to suck. He blew the charge. The glass shattered outward. The atmosphere of the dome exploded into space. Elias and Lyris were sucked out into the void. For a second, there was only silence and cold and the terrible beauty of the stars. Elias felt his lungs trying to burst. He saw Lyris drifting away, her arms flailing. "Got you," her voice whispered in his head. She fired a grapple line from her bracer. It wrapped around his waist. She fired the other end at the shuttle's open cargo ramp. The line went taut. They swung through the vacuum, slamming into the metal ramp of the shuttle. Rix was there, pulling them in. He hit the seal button. Atmosphere flooded back. Elias gasped, coughing violently, his vision spotting. "We are clear," Heavy shouted from the cockpit. "Hang on, I am punching it." The shuttle accelerated, G-forces pinning them to the deck. Laser fire from the station chased them, burning streaks of light into the darkness. But Heavy wove through the traffic like a madman. Elias lay on the floor, clutching the data drive to his chest. He looked over at Lyris. She was bruised, bleeding from a cut on her forehead and gasping for air. She looked at him and grinned, her fangs showing. "That," she wheezed, "was a terrible trust exercise." Elias laughed, a painful, hacking sound. He reached out and took her hand. "We are fugitives," he said. "We are free," she corrected. "Where to?" Rix asked, looking back at them. Elias sat up. He looked at the drive. "The summit," he said. "We have a war to stop." The summit of Unity was a lie built from glass and titanium. It floated in geostationary orbit above the blue-white swirl of the planet below, a massive architectural handshake suspended in the void. Half of the station was unmistakably human, all brutalist angles, gunmetal steel and utilitarian viewing ports. The other half was Vathran, a sweeping curve of organic white stone and bioluminescent spires that looked less like a building and more like the ribcage of a leviathan. Where the two halves met, they fused in a chaotic, beautiful scar of engineering, a symbol of the peace that was supposed to be signed today. Elias Ward hated it immediately. He adjusted the collar of the stolen maintenance uniform. It was tight across the shoulders, and the fabric smelled of industrial solvent. Beside him, Lyris Vaith moved with a stiffness that had nothing to do with her disguise. She wore the heavy hooded robes of a Vathran acolyte, a veil obscuring her face, but Elias could feel the tension radiating off her like heat from a dying engine. Through the bond, her anxiety tasted like copper in his mouth. "Keep your head down," Elias murmured, keeping his voice low as they merged with the crowd of logistical staff moving toward the service elevators. "We are just two sanitation workers late for a shift." "I am a commander of the Royal Fleet," Lyris whispered back, the sound sharp with humiliation. "I do not clean refuse." "Today you do," Elias said. "Unless you want to explain to the 300 station guards why the Queen's Fang is sneaking in the back door." They pushed through the throng. The station was teeming with life. Diplomats in silk suits brushed shoulders with Vathran nobles in ceremonial armor. The air was a cacophony of languages, laughter, and the clinking of champagne glasses. It was a party at the end of the world. They reached a quiet alcove near the kitchen services. Elias pulled out a data pad he had lifted from a sleeping guard 3 levels down. He tried to ping the secure frequency Admiral Vance had given him. The screen flashed red. Connection refused. Elias said, his stomach dropping. He tried again. This time, the screen dissolved into a static-filled alert. His own face, grainy and grim, appeared on the display, side by side with Lyris. "Terrorist threat. Level 5. Shoot on sight." Elias stared at the words. "They are fast," he said. "Holloway and Vex have already flagged us. We can't get to Vance. If we step onto the main floor, security will shred us before we can open our mouths." Lyris leaned against the wall, her hand trembling as she pulled back her veil slightly. Her eyes were wide, swirling with a mixture of fear and betrayal. "The Queen," she whispered. "She has signed the warrant. She believes I have turned against her." "She is being manipulated," Elias said, gripping her shoulder. He felt the bond surge, a wave of despair washing over him from her mind. He pushed back against it, sending a pulse of steady, grounding resolve. "Listen to me. Real loyalty isn't about doing whatever you are told. It is about saving your people even when they are trying to kill you." Lyris looked at him. The despair in the bond receded, replaced by a flicker of steel. "You sound like a revolutionary, Elias Ward." "I am just a guy who wants to go 5 minutes without being shot at," he replied. "Now look at this." He brought up the stolen schematics from the vault data. Rix had managed to decrypt the final layer of the tactical overlay before they separated at the docking bay. "Here is the play," Elias said, pointing to the glowing map. 2 strike points. Holloway has a swarm of micro-drones stored in the human ventilation hub. They are loaded with a Vathran bioagent. And there, Lyris pointed to a section of the Vathran wing. "The War Chapel. The old Fang Circle has a strike team there. They are carrying human-manufactured explosives." "It is a double tap," Elias said. "The drones spray the human delegates, making it look like a Vathran biological attack. The strike team bombs the Vathran nobles, making it look like human terrorism. No survivors, no questions, just instant total war." "We have to stop both," Lyris said. "We can't be in 2 places at once," Elias said, "and we can't trust anyone else to do it." He looked at her. The decision hung in the air, heavy and inevitable. "I take the drones," Elias said. "I know the override codes for the human systems. And I go to the chapel," Lyris said. "I must face my own kind." Elias hesitated. The bond was screaming at him to stay close to her. The thought of separating, of severing the physical proximity that had become their lifeline, made his chest ache. "If we split up," he said quietly, "I can't watch your back." Lyris reached out, her fingers brushing the bandage on his neck. "You are in my blood." "Elias," she said, "you watch my back from the inside." She leaned in, her forehead pressing against his for a fleeting second. "Do not die," she commanded. "I will try to pencil it in," he said. They broke apart. Elias watched her vanish into the shadows of the service corridor, her robes billowing like smoke. He felt a sudden, sharp emptiness, as if a limb had been removed. He grit his teeth, checked the charge on his stolen pistol, and turned toward the ventilation hub. The ventilation hub was a labyrinth of roaring fans and pressurized ducts. Elias moved fast, sliding down ladders and vaulting over steam pipes. He was no longer the diplomat or the spy. He was a soldier. He reached the primary control deck. It was guarded. 4 men in unmarked tactical gear stood by the console, their weapons low but ready. These were not Alliance Marines. These were Ares Corporation contractors, mercenaries. Elias stayed in the shadows of a turbine housing. He closed his eyes, reaching out with his mind. He couldn't read thoughts, but the bond had tuned his senses to a razor's edge. He felt Lyris. She was moving through silence. She was calm. Her heart rate was steady. That steadiness grounded him. Elias drew his weapon. He stepped out. "Shift change," he said loudly. The 4 mercs spun around. Elias didn't wait. He put 2 rounds into the knee of the point man and dove behind a stack of crates as the room erupted in gunfire. Bullets sparked off the metal floor. Elias scrambled, his breath coming in short gasps. He returned fire, clipped a second guard, and rolled toward the console. "Give it up," one of the mercs shouted. "You are one man." I am one man with a very angry girlfriend, Elias muttered to himself. He popped up, firing a suppression burst, and reached the terminal. His fingers flew across the keys. He slammed in the override chip Rix had prepped. Access denied. Elias cursed. They had hard-locked the system. He needed a manual bypass. That meant opening the service panel underneath the desk, all while being used for target practice. Lyris walked into the war chapel. It was a cavernous space, smelling of burning sulfur and ancient iron. The walls were lined with the skulls of beasts hunted on 1,000 worlds. In the center, a massive fire pit burned with blue flames. 50 warriors of the Old Fang Circle stood in formation. They were chanting, a low, guttural rhythm that vibrated in the bones. At the head of the circle stood the war priest, a massive Vathran with scars carving intricate patterns into his carapace. He held a ceremonial blade, raising it to the crowd. "Today we cleanse the galaxy," the war priest roared. "Today the soft bloods burn." Lyris threw back her hood. She dropped the acolyte's robe, revealing the stolen combat armor beneath. "Lies," she screamed, her voice cutting through the chant like a whip. The chanting stopped. 50 heads turned. The war priest lowered his blade, his eyes narrowing. "The traitor," he hissed. "You dare enter this holy place? I dare because I am Vathran." Lyris shouted, striding forward. She ignored the warriors reaching for their weapons. She walked straight toward the fire. "You speak of cleansing. Priest, you are about to murder your own queen with human bombs." She raised her hand, projecting a hologram from her wrist unit. It was the financial ledger, the transaction between Ares Corp and the Old Fang Circle. "Look," she commanded. "Look at the price of your honor. You have been bought by human coin." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some warriors looked at the data, confused. Others looked furious. "Her mind is poisoned," the war priest bellowed. "She has mated with the enemy. She is no longer one of us. Kill her." 3 warriors charged. Lyris did not draw her weapon. She stood her ground. "I invoke the Kavas Tor," she screamed. The warriors skidded to a halt, inches from her. The term was ancient, archaic. It meant the right of the bound. "I have tasted the blood of the enemy," Lyris declared, her voice ringing off the stone walls. "I carry the life of the outsider in my veins. By the laws of the first hunt, I stand with a foot in both worlds. I speak for the human because he is mine, and I speak for the Vathran because I am yours. You cannot silence me without silencing the law itself," the war priest snarled. "The law applies to warriors, not traitors." He leaped from the dais, his ceremonial blade swinging down in a lethal arc. Elias felt the blow before it happened. He was under the console, hot-wiring the drone guidance system when a sudden blinding flash of panic and pain exploded in his head. "Lyris." His hand slipped. A spark from the exposed wires burned his finger. He gasped, nearly dropping his tool. The bond was screaming. She was fighting. She was overwhelmed. Elias closed his eyes for a microsecond. "Hold on," he projected, pouring every ounce of his adrenaline, his rage, and his stubborn refusal to die into the connection. "I am here. Fight." He snapped the last wire into place. The terminal beeped. System unlocked. Elias rolled out from under the desk. A mercenary was standing right over him. Rifle raised. Elias didn't think. He swung the heavy metal wrench in his hand, smashing it into the merc's knee, then drove his shoulder into the man's stomach. They grappled, rolling across the floor. Elias was tired. He was battered. But he felt Lyris's ferocity bleeding into him. He fought with the strength of 2. He disarmed the man, kicked him away, and slammed his hand onto the enter key. Targeting parameters updated, the computer announced pleasantly. On the screens above, 1,000 red dots representing the drones shifted course. They turned away from the ventilation shafts and pointed toward the open airlock. Lyris caught the war priest's wrist. It was impossible. He was twice her weight, fueled by battle frenzy. But as his blade descended, she felt a surge of power that was not her own. It was gritty, human, and desperate. It was Elias. She roared, twisting the priest's arm. Bones snapped. The priest howled, dropping the blade. Lyris swept his legs, driving him to the stone floor. She snatched up his sword and pinned him, the tip of the blade hovering over his throat. The room went deathly silent. According to tradition, she should kill him. She should sever his head and claim his command. The warriors watched, waiting for the blood. Lyris looked down at the priest. She felt the urge, the ancient instinct to purge the weak. But then she felt Elias again. She felt his hands on the keyboard, his decision to redirect the drones rather than turn them on the mercenaries. She felt his mercy. She pulled the blade back. "No," she said, her voice shaking with effort. She threw the sword into the fire pit. "We are done with death," she told the stunned circle. "The old ways are ash. We do not kill for pride anymore. We live for truth." She pointed to the projection, where the data was still scrolling. "The bombs you carry are set to detonate in 5 minutes. They are rigged with remote detonators controlled by High Lord Vex. Check your gear. Check the timers." One of the younger warriors hesitated, then opened the casing of the satchel charge he was carrying. He paled. "The timer is active," the warrior shouted. "It is counting down." Panic broke the trance. "Disarm them," Lyris commanded. "Throw them into the disposal chutes. Now!" The warriors scrambled, obeying her not because of rank, but because she was right. In the Grand Summit chamber, the speeches were just beginning. Admiral Holloway stood at the podium, speaking of the tragic necessity of vigilance. Suddenly, the massive viewing ports behind him flashed white. Outside in the void, a swarm of 1,000 drones detonated simultaneously. They were far enough away that the explosion was harmless, a silent, blooming flower of fire and debris against the stars. The room gasped. Security alarms blared. "System malfunction," Holloway stammered, tapping his earpiece. "Vex, report. Why did they detonate early?" His microphone was still on. The words echoed through the chamber. Holloway froze, realizing his mistake. At the same moment, the blast doors at the back of the chamber hissed open. Elias Ward limped in. His uniform was torn, blood running down his face from a cut on his scalp. He held a pistol in one hand and the data drive in the other. Beside him walked Lyris Vaith. She was bruised, soot-stained, and terrifyingly majestic. They walked together, not as prisoner and guard, but as equals. "Admiral," Elias said, his voice ragged but carrying to the back of the room. "I think you dropped this." He tossed the data drive onto the polished floor. It skidded to a halt at Holloway's feet. "Security!" Holloway screamed. "Kill them! They are terrorists!" No one moved. On the main view screen, the image changed. It was no longer the Alliance logo. It was a security feed from the War Chapel. It showed the warriors disarming the bombs. It showed the war priest on his knees, confessing the plot. And then, another feed popped up. It was High Lord Vex, caught in the corridor by station security, screaming that Holloway had forced him to do it. The silence in the room was absolute. Elias stepped forward. He looked at the gathered leaders, the human counselors, the Vaithran nobles, the queen herself, who watched from her throne on the dais. "You wanted a war," Elias said. He sounded tired. He sounded like a man who had seen too much of the universe's ugly side. "You wanted it because it is easy, because hate pays the bills, because it is simpler to shoot a monster than to understand a person." He touched the bandage on his neck. I was a weapon for you. Point and shoot. And when she bit me, when this happened, I thought my life was over. I thought I was contaminated. He looked at Lyris. She was watching him, her eyes soft, her shields down. But I learned something, Elias said. I learned that the person you call a monster is just as scared as you are. I learned that she bleeds the same way I do. And I learned that the only way to stop the bleeding is to stop the fighting. Lyris stepped up beside him. She addressed her queen. My queen, she said, bowing her head. The bond I share with this human was an accident of war, but what we did today, saving this station, saving your life, that was a choice. She turned to face the room. The old laws say a bite is a claim of ownership, that the mate is a thrall. She shook her head. That ends today. A bond is not a chain. It is a bridge. From this moment on, no Vathran shall claim a mate who does not choose them back. We do not own each other. We survive together. She took Elias's hand. We choose peace, Lyris said. Who stands with us? For a long, agonizing second, nothing happened. Then, Admiral Vance stood up. He walked over to Holloway, ripped the rank insignia from the traitor's collar, and nodded to Elias. I stand with you, Vance said. The Vathran queen stood slowly. She looked at Lyris, then at the cowering war priest on the screen. The old Fang circle is dissolved, the queen declared, her voice echoing with ancient power. Arrest the conspirators. Pandemonium erupted. Guards moved in, grabbing Holloway and his aides. Diplomats shouted. But in the center of the storm, Elias and Lyris stood still. The bond between them was quiet now. The panic was gone. The fear was gone. There was only a warm, steady hum of exhaustion and relief. Elias squeezed her hand. We did it, he whispered. Lyris looked at him, a small, tired smile touching her lips. We are not dead, she agreed. That is a start, Elias said, outside the viewports. The war fleets that had been powering up their weapons began to turn, slowly, heavily. They angled away from the station, their running lights blinking off one by one. The war was over. The hard part was just beginning. The peace treaty was signed in ink, but the cleanup was paid for in subpoenas, salvage operations, and the relentless grinding of bureaucracy. For 3 weeks, Halcyon Station ceased to be a diplomatic battleground and became a crime scene. The arrest of Admiral Holloway and High Lord Vex had triggered a cascade failure across the conspiratorial networks of both civilizations. In the human sector, corporate boards at Ares Corporation were raided by military police, dragging executives out of high-rise offices in binders. In the Vathran Empire, the Queen's Inquisitors moved through the old Fang circle like a scythe, arresting war priests and stripping noble houses of their titles. It was satisfying, in a grim sort of way, but Elias Ward knew better than to think the rot was gone. He watched the news feeds from the secure living quarters he shared with Lyris. He saw the faces of the arrested, but he also noticed the gaps, the middlemen who had vanished, the financiers who had quietly moved their assets to neutral banks in the outer rim. Corruption is like mold, Elias said, gesturing at the screen with a piece of burnt toast. You can scrub the surface, but the spores are in the drywall. Lyris Vath sat across from him at the small kitchenette table, nursing a cup of human coffee with an expression of profound suspicion. She wore simple civilian clothes, a loose tunic and trousers provided by the station's quartermaster. She looked smaller without her armor, but no less dangerous. It is not mold, she corrected him. It is survival. There will always be those who profit from fear. We have simply made it less convenient for them to do so today. She took a sip of the coffee and grimaced, her nose wrinkling. Why does your species consume this? She asked. It tastes like battery acid boiled in despair. It is an acquired taste, Elias said, taking a bite of his toast. Like that moss tea you tried to feed me yesterday. The stuff that tasted like a wet gym sock. That tea is a digestive aid harvested from the sacred groves of Vilos, Lyris said, offended. It clarifies the blood. It nearly clarified my stomach lining right out of my body. They shared a look, and then a small, tired smile passed between them. It was a quiet morning ritual. They were technically in protective custody, housed in a neutral VIP complex on the station's upper ring. The guards outside the door were a mix of human marines and Vathran wardens, a symbolic joint detail that spent most of its time staring awkwardly at each other. Inside, Elias and Lyris were in a strange limbo. They were not prisoners, but they were not free. They were evidence. Every afternoon the summons would come. They would be escorted to the Grand Hall, which had been converted into a tribunal chamber. The hearings were grueling marathons of questioning, broadcast live to billions of viewers across both systems. The prosecutors were relentless. They accused Elias of treason for stealing state secrets. They accused Lyris of reckless vigilantism and violating the sanctity of the royal court. Elias sat in the witness chair, the lights hot on his face. Did you or did you not knowingly collaborate with a foreign combatant to undermine the chain of command? The human prosecutor asked. A man with a face like a hatchet. I collaborated with an ally to stop a genocide, Elias replied, his voice calm. If that undermines your chain of command, maybe you need a better chain. You are a soldier. Sergeant, you follow orders. I am a human being, Elias shot back, and I follow my conscience. When the order is to let a bomb go off in a room full of peacemakers, the order is wrong. The Vathran tribunal was no gentler. An elder questioned Lyris, demanding to know if her judgment had been compromised by the biopsionic bond. The human has infected your mind, the elder sneered. You protect him because the bite compels you. You are a slave to your own biology. Lyris stood up, the chains of her ceremonial restraints rattling. I protect him because he is the bravest soul I have ever met, she declared, her voice ringing through the chamber. The bond allows me to feel his fear, yes, but it also allows me to feel his integrity. Do not speak to me of slavery, elder. I was a slave when I blindly followed the old Fang circle into a war for profit. I am free now. The turning point came on the 5th day. The tribunal was exhausted. The accusations were becoming repetitive. The human prosecutor, frustrated by their refusal to break, played a clip from the station's security feed, the moment in the maintenance shaft where they had kissed, clinging to each other in the dark. Is this a military alliance? The prosecutor sneered. Or is this simply lust masquerading as heroism? On the screen, the image of their desperation played out. It was raw. It was vulnerable. In the courtroom. Elias felt Lyris stiffen beside him. He reached out, ignoring the gasp of the gallery, and took her hand. He interlaced their fingers, resting them on the table for everyone to see. It is love, Elias said, looking directly into the camera. It is messy, and it is complicated, and it started with a war crime. But it is the reason half of you are alive to sit in judgment of us today. So go ahead, judge us. But do not pretend you wouldn't have done the same thing to save the person who matters most to you. Lyris squeezed his hand, her bioluminescence flaring a soft, defiant blue. That clip went viral within the hour. By evening, The narrative had shifted. They were no longer traitors. They were the star-crossed lovers who had defied empires. Downtime in the suite became a sanctuary. As the fleets outside began the slow, painful process of de-escalation, Elias and Lyris navigated the minefield of their own domesticity. They argued about everything. Elias tried to introduce her to human pop culture, which was a disaster. "Why is the feline angry?" Lyris asked, staring at a tablet screen. "It is a meme," Elias explained. "The cat is grumpy. It is funny, but why?" Lyris tilted her head, looking genuinely distressed. "Is it ill? Does it require a hunt? It is just a face." "Lyris, your culture is baffling. You find joy in the suffering of small predators. And your culture thinks headbutting is a form of affection," Elias countered. "It is a cranial pressure exchange," Lyris said haughtily. "It aligns the neural pathways." "Right. Well, keep your cranial pressure to yourself until I have had my coffee." He teased her mercilessly about her reputation. One evening, she accidentally broke a glass while washing dishes. Her grip strength was still calibrated for crushing throats. "Easy there." "Queen's Fang," Elias said, handing her a broom. "You are a terrifying space girlfriend. Try not to murder the kitchenware." Lyris glared at him, but her eyes were dancing with amusement. "I could murder you." "Soft blood." "You could," Elias agreed, stepping closer. "But then who would explain the grumpy cat to you?" The humor was a shield, but beneath it, the tension was shifting. The frantic, adrenaline-fueled lust of the mission had settled into something deeper, something that felt dangerously like permanence. One night, they sat by the panoramic window, watching a human cruiser tow a disabled Vethran frigate into the repair yards. The stars were bright and cold. "Elias," Lyris said softly. Her voice lacked its usual command cadence. "Yeah? What happens when they let us go?" Elias looked at her. The reflection of the station lights played across her pale skin. "I do not know. I assume I get a dishonorable discharge. Maybe a pension if they are feeling generous." "I am afraid," Lyris admitted. She did not look at him. She looked at her hands. "You? Afraid?" Elias scoffed gently. "You jumped into a vacuum without a suit. I am afraid of this." She gestured between them. "All my life, I have been a weapon. I was forged to be sharp, to be hard, to cut. With you, I feel soft. I feel the edges wearing down. If I am not a weapon, Elias, I do not know what I am." Elias turned on the bench, facing her. He reached out and took her hand, tracing the calluses on her palm. "You think I don't feel it?" he asked. "I have been a soldier since I was 18. I have spent 20 years building walls so I wouldn't have to feel what it is like to watch my friends die. And then you came along and bit a hole right through the wall." He raised her hand to his lips. "It is terrifying. Lyris, being vulnerable is harder than combat. In a fight, you know who the enemy is. In this, the enemy is your own fear that you are not enough." Lyris looked at him, her eyes shining. "You are enough," she whispered. "You are more than enough. And so are you." Elias said, "You are not just a weapon. Lyris, you are the woman who stopped an execution in the war chapel. You are the woman who tries to understand cat memes because she knows it makes me laugh. You are... you." The bond hummed between them, a warm, golden resonance that filled the silence. 2 days later, they decided to stop running from the inevitable. It was not a legal requirement. It was not a political stunt. It was a choice. They cleared the furniture from the center of the living room. They invited the only people on the station they actually trusted. Heavy, the sarcastic pilot, Rix, Lyris's punk rock cousin, and Admiral Vance, who had risked his career to protect them. It was a small, awkward gathering. Heavy was drinking champagne out of a mug. Rix was live-streaming the ceiling to his followers until Lyris threatened to break his communicator. "We are gathered here," Vance said, looking uncomfortable but pleased, because apparently, saving the galaxy wasn't enough drama for you two. Elias stood facing Lyris. He wore his dress uniform, cleaned and pressed. She wore a ceremonial gown of white silk that shimmered like pearl. They had decided to blend their traditions. Lyris stepped forward. She held a small pot of ceremonial paint, mixed from the dust of vilos and gold leaf. With the tip of her finger, she traced a pattern on Elias's neck, circling the 4 faded scars of the bite. In the old ways, this mark was a chain. She spoke, her voice steady. "It said mine. Today, I redraw it." She finished the circle, an intricate design of interlocking curves. "It is a shield," she said. "It says us. I claim no ownership over you, Elias Ward. I offer only my life to stand beside yours. I choose you, not as a thrall, but as my equal, my mirror, my heart." Elias swallowed past the lump in his throat. He reached out and placed his hand flat over her heart. He could feel the powerful rhythmic beating beneath her ribs. "I spent my life fighting monsters," Elias said. "And then I met you. And I realized the only monsters were the ones who told us we had to hate each other." He pressed his hand firmer. "I choose you, Lyris Vaith. I choose the arguments. I choose the scary driving. I choose the bond. I promise to watch your back, to keep your secrets, and to never let you forget that you are a person, not a sword." Rick sniffled loudly in the background. "Interstellar relationship goals," he whispered to Heavy. Heavy toasted with his mug. "To the freaks. Long may they reign." Elias and Lyris ignored them. They leaned in, their foreheads touching. The bond flared, not with the chaotic noise of the past, but with a pure, harmonic tone. It was a feeling of absolute rightness, of a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. That night, the suite was quiet. The guests had gone. The lights were dimmed to a low amber glow. Elias stood by the window, loosening his tie. Lyris came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist, resting her chin on his shoulder. "So," Elias said quietly, "we are officially mated. Does this mean I have to start eating that moss tea?" Lyris laughed, a low vibration against his back. "Shut up, Elias." She turned him around. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown black. The playfulness was gone, replaced by a raw, naked intensity. The bond was singing now. It was a physical pull, a magnetic force that made the air between them thick. "We have spent so long fighting," Lyris whispered. "Fighting each other, fighting the war, fighting this." "I am done fighting," Elias said. He kissed her. It was slow, deliberate, and devastatingly tender. It was a kiss that tasted of relief. They moved to the bedroom, shedding the layers of uniform and silk, shedding the titles of sergeant and commander. In the darkness, skin met skin, human warmth against cool, bioluminescent resilience. When they finally joined, it wasn't a conquest, it was a conversation. The bond opened wide, allowing them to feel every nuance of the other's pleasure, every flicker of emotion. Elias felt her relief, her overwhelming sense of safety for the first time in decades. Lyris felt his adoration, his awe of her, his complete surrender of control. It was messy and beautiful and healing. It was the final exorcism of the violence that had brought them together. They held each other as the galaxy spun outside, anchoring themselves in the simple, profound truth of their bodies. For the first time since the hangar bay, the bite didn't hurt. It just glowed, a soft, steady light in the dark. The morning brought news. Admiral Vance arrived early, accompanied by a Vathran diplomat. They looked serious, but not grim. "The hearings are concluded," Vance said, sitting down. "And?" Elias asked, gripping Lyris's hand under the table. "Compromise," the diplomat said. "The politicians are terrified of you. You are too popular to imprison, but too dangerous to let loose in the military." "So, amnesty," Vance said. "Full pardons for the shuttle theft, the unauthorized combat, and the breach of protocol. The Alliance and the Empire have agreed to formally recognize your union. It is being cited as a new legal precedent, the Ward-Vythe Protocol." Lyris raised an eyebrow. "They named a law after us?" "Don't let it go to your head," Elias muttered. "There is a condition," Vance added. "You are both being honorably discharged. Your military careers are over." Elias felt a wave of relief so strong he nearly slumped in his chair. "Good. However," the diplomat continued, "the Queen and the Council have authorized the creation of a joint task force. Its mandate is to hunt down the remnants of the conspiracy, the war profiteers and rogue cells that escaped the initial sweep. We want you to lead it," Vance said. "Not as soldiers, as advisors, as consultants. You will operate outside the standard chain of command. You pick your team. You pick your targets." Elias looked at Lyris. He felt her mind working, weighing the offer. She wasn't thinking about glory. She was thinking about the work that was left undone. "We have conditions," Lyris said. "Name them," Vance said. "No propaganda," she said firmly. "We do not do photo ops. We do not cut ribbons. We work in the shadows." "Agreed." And Elias added, "We keep the right to walk away. If we smell even a whiff of corruption, if either side tries to use us to start another Cold War, we are done. We disappear. And you won't find us." Vance looked at the diplomat. They nodded. "Done," Vance said. "Welcome to the private sector." The observation deck of Halcyon Station was the highest point in the sector. From here, you could see the curve of the planet and the endless scatter of stars beyond. But today, the view was different. The massive warships of the human and Vathran fleets were gone. In their place, a new fleet was launching. These ships were smaller. Sleek vessels painted in white and gold. They were mixed-crew exploration ships, built with shared technology, manned by humans and Vathran working side by side, the Unity class. Elias leaned against the railing, watching a ship ignite its engines and streak away toward the unknown regions. "Not bad," he said. "Not bad at all." Lyris stood beside him. She was wearing a new jacket, a blend of human leather and Vathran mesh. She looked relaxed, her posture less rigid than he had ever seen it. "It is a beginning," she said. Elias looked at her. He touched the scar on his neck. "You know," he said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "For someone who claimed it was just an accidental bite in a hangar bay, you sure managed to change the entire galaxy." Lyris turned to him. Her eyes were luminous, reflecting the starlight. She smiled, and her fangs flashed, sharp, dangerous, and utterly beautiful. "You changed the galaxy first, Elias Ward." "Me? I just complained until people stopped shooting." "No," Lyris said, stepping closer. "You changed it by insisting that even a sacred bond must honor freedom. You taught a warrior that power is meaningless without choice." She took his hand, interlacing their fingers. "We rewrote the rules," she said. Elias looked out at the ships. then back at the woman who had once tried to kill him, the woman who was now the other half of his soul. "Yeah," he said softly. "We did." He squeezed her hand. "So, partner, where do we start?" Laris looked toward the docking bay, where the stealth shuttle, now legally theirs, was waiting. "There is a rumor of a smuggler ring moving illegal weapons in the Vale sector," she said. "Sounds dangerous," Elias said. "Extremely." Elias grinned. "I will drive. You will not," Lyris said. "You crash everything." They turned and walked away together, bickering softly, their fingers intertwined. They walked away from the politics, from the cameras, and from the past. They walked into a future that was uncertain, messy, and dangerous. But as they disappeared into the station's crowd, the bond between them hummed a steady, unbreakable note. It was the sound of a new era. It was the sound of peace. And most of all, it was the sound of two people who had found their way home.